Hey, Z-Speed back with another install. Today we've got the outer tie rods on the 350Z, and the good news is it's not super difficult. You can run into some problems if you've never changed them out before, and that's what happened to me, and we'll be going over that. But this is what it should look like when it's all changed out. This is a new one, and we're looking at the outer tie rod right here attached to the knuckle, and you can follow it down right here, and you see that silver nut right there, and that's where the inner tie rod starts. And you can see the inner tie rod boot right here, and that is where it's attached to the rack and pinion steering right here. So we won't have to deal too much with the inner tie rod. We will be checking it to see if it's still good, but we'll be dealing with the outer tie rod right here, which basically starts where that nut is, and we'll have to break that nut loose first. Then we can remove the outer tie rod. So let's get started. We'll need 2 open-end wrenches or 2 crescent wrenches to break this tie rod loose, one to stabilize the tie rod and one to break the nut loose. Once you get that nut broken loose, don't move it very far, because this will be our reference point. Once we go to reinstall the tie rod, we'll need to stop right where that nut is. I was able to get pretty much an exact match at AutoZone for my tie rods. The only difference was that the stock tie rods do have cotter pins, so make sure to remove those first. I didn't show the removal there, but once you get them out, you're ready to get a nice big breaker bar up on top of that nut and break it loose. Okay, at this point you can see I'm removing the nut from the top of the tie rod, but I decide at this point to place it back on and screw the nut down so it's just flush with the top of the tie rod bolt. And what we're going to do here is we're going to increase our surface area, so when we strike the tie rod bolt, we have a little more surface area to contact. Now we're going to need as much surface area as possible, because this tie rod's been in this vehicle for 15 years plus, and we've got quite a bit of oxidation going on, plus a little rust from the metal bolt. So between the two, they're really fixed in there, and I just adjusted the knuckle hoping to take a little tension off of it, and I wiggle it around, but to no avail, because I'm pounding away at this thing and I could not get this thing to break free. And of course I didn't want to break or damage the knuckle, so at this point I've decided there's a couple other options we can use when you have a tie rod that will not come out. The second option I would probably go with would be a pickle fork, otherwise known as a tie rod separator. And then the third would be to take a blowtorch and heat up the bottom of the tie rod and heat the knuckle up a little bit. So we're going to try the tie rod separator first, and then we can try the torch if that doesn't work. So the theory behind the torch would be that you would be heating the metal, allowing it to expand, and then as the metal cools, it will contract and hopefully break free some of the oxidation and rust process, and making it a little bit easier to break loose. So now we're going to try this tie rod separator, aka pickle fork, and you can pick one of these up at AutoZone for about 15-20 bucks, not a bad deal. And the theory behind this is that it acts like a wedge, and as you can see, as I pound it in, it's going to really create quite a bit of force between the knuckle and the tie rod. So that would hopefully break some of the oxidation free and make it easier to remove. Now the downside of pickle fork is that it will definitely damage your rubber boot on your tie rod, so that's something you need to consider if you're going to reuse your tie rod. But we're not, because we're getting rid of these old tie rods, so we're not going to worry at all about any damage to the rubber boot. You can see I've pounded it again on top, trying to help break some of the oxidation free. And now I'm really going to hit this pickle fork really hard, pound it in there as hard as I can. And now I didn't actually get the separation on film, because at this point I thought, well, if something breaks loose and it hits the camera, I surely don't want to damage my camera. So you can see it starting to wiggle here, but I started pounding really hard on this thing, and I moved the camera so I didn't catch that on film, but it did separate. So we're pretty happy about that. We do not have to use the torch method at this time. Okay, now that we finally got the tie rod separated from the knuckle, we can remove this old tie rod. So what I'm doing now is counting every single revolution as I spin it off, because I want to replace the new one with the exact same amount of revolutions, so we can get our alignment very close to the original specs. It's obviously not going to be perfect at all, and you still need to get an alignment, but at least on the way to the alignment shop, we're not going to damage our tires getting there. So you can see I'm counting every single revolution, and I ended up with about 17 and a half, but I did not touch that little nut that's in there. We want to keep that right where it's at as a secondary point of reference. And at this point, we want to check the inner tie rod. I didn't show it here, but what we're going to do is move it up and down and side to side. We would hope that it would stick right where you left it. We don't want to drift or slowly droop down in this position. If it does, it's probably going to need to be replaced. We want it to be semi-stiff. It doesn't have to be super stiff, but we don't really want it moving around once we let it go. So if your tie rod is okay, like mine was, then we can go ahead and keep that inner tie rod and go on to this next step, is to put the new tie rod on. One quick note, the new tie rods do not come with this washer right here, so we need to keep the washer from the original tie rod so we can place it onto our new one. And now we're ready to replace the tie rod. Okay, at this point you need to apply just a little bit of multi-purpose grease to the end of the tie rod so we get a smooth installation here. But you need to pay special attention to the new tie rod when you go to replace it, because I started to cross thread right here, and now you can see I'm removing it and then reapplying it because it just got hung up right away. So be careful with cross threading. You don't want to do that. But once you've got it on there correctly, now you're ready to count each revolution again, and hopefully it will come out. And mine came out a little short. I think it was 16 and a half versus 17. But you just want to thread it back on nice and slow. It should go on smoothly, and if it doesn't, then you may be cross threading, so be very careful of that. We don't want to damage the new tie rod. Once you get your 17 revolutions or whatever you came up with for your tie rod, you want to stop and then take the inner tie rod nut, the little silver nut, and just tighten it up loosely. And we're gonna fix those a little bit later, but we're going to loosely tighten those together by hand for now. Then we're going to go ahead and place it back into the knuckle at this point. Okay, now that you've replaced the tie rod back into the knuckle, it's time to torque it down. Don't forget to put the washer on top of the tie rod, then the nut, the locking nut, and we're ready to torque this thing down. You're going to need a foot-pound torque wrench. And right here, I've discovered that I really just don't have enough room to get my torque wrench in there and torque it down correctly. We're going to torque it to 25 foot-pounds. So this is a 04, the 03, 04 were probably the same, 25 foot-pounds knuckle to tie rod. But check your specs for the 05 and up. It may not be the same, it may be the same, I can't tell you for sure. So what I've done here is I've got an extension, and I was able to get in there a lot better with an extension and torque it down to 25 foot-pounds. Now at this point, we're ready to torque down that little nut to the tie rod. And right here, I thought I could just kind of torque it and we'll be okay. But as you can see, the whole tie rod will rotate. So you have to have 2 wrenches here, one to stabilize the outer tie rod and then one to torque the nut down. So make sure you use 2 wrenches here. Okay, you're probably wondering, how do I know for sure if I need new tie rods? Well, this is a great example right here. You can see this boot is completely disintegrated. I mean, totally shot. And it should look like this right here. So if you're wondering, hey, I wonder if I need new tie rods or not, this is a great example of, yeah, you need new tie rods bad. So this is what it should look like, not like the disintegrated boot version, okay? So at this point, don't forget to take your car into the alignment shop and get it realigned, because you're definitely going to need one. If you have any questions about the tie rods or anything else on the 350Z platform, please just leave a comment below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I hope this video helps you out. If it did, please like and subscribe to Z Speed, and we will be back very soon with another video. I hope you have a great day.